So for the email page, let's say I pick frame 20, insert timeline and blank keyframe, and I'll just type email. This is my little placeholder. And for search, I'll go to frame 30. Again, it could also be frame 31, it could be frame 27, it doesn't matter. It's just a placeholder. You can pick whatever frame you want because we're going to add a command that's basically going to tell it to go to whichever frame you want later. Okay, so here I type in search. Okay, so we have our placeholder pages. We have the home page, the messages page, the email page, and the search page. So we go back home, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this little icon. This is eventually going to be my button that will take me to the messages page. So the first thing I need to do is I need to click on properties. So if you don't have properties open, you simply go to Window, and you can choose properties from this drop-down. The first thing we need to do is we need to change it. Up here, it's listed as a graphic. We need to change it into a button. And we need to give it an instance name. So just like in Illustrator, we talked about in Illustrator there's symbols and then there's instances of those symbols. Well, in our library in Flash, we have an instance, or we have symbols, and this is an instance of it, so we need to give it a name. So I'm going to call BTN, that's short for button in Flash, and I'll just call it MSG for messages. Okay, so when I click on it again, we can see that it took it. We now need to do one more thing. If we go to Library and open up our folder, this is all the artwork that was copied and pasted into Illustrator. And here we can see each of them if we click on them. So this is the icon for a graphic symbol, this is the icon for a movie clip, and here is the one I want. In Illustrator I called it Talk Bubble. Wasn't really the best name, but that's what I named it at the time. So what I'm now going to do is control click on it in the library and choose properties and change it from a graphic to a button. Click OK, and you'll notice now that we have 3 different types of symbols in our library in Flash. This indicates it's a graphic. Again, this is a movie clip, and you can see the little finger pressing down. That's a button. It needs to be a button if it's going to be clickable. So I now need to do one more thing. I need to double click on it to enter button isolation edit mode for this symbol. I'm now in button isolation edit mode. We can see that because if you look in the upper left hand corner, you could see that we were previously in scene 1 and now we're in button isolation edit mode for that button. So buttons have their own layers, and there's also a few steps here that we need to do. By default, the up state is what you see when the button first loads. We're not going to worry about over, and we're not going to worry about down. What we need to do is we need to click right beneath hit, and we need to choose insert, timeline, and keyframe. Previously we were choosing blank keyframe. This time we're choosing keyframe. The difference is a blank keyframe, if I placed a blank keyframe here, we would have nothing. Okay, what I want to do is I want to copy over the exact content that was here on the first state to the hit state. So by choosing keyframe, it fills it with a black circle. The hit state is invisible. It's a requirement in order for the button to be functional. When I'm all done with that, I come back up here to the top and I just click back on scene 1 and it takes me back. It exits isolation mode. let's go ahead and test our movie. We test our movie, our project, that's what it's called in Flash. We're going to go ahead and go to the top and choose Control, Test Movie, and I'll go to the bottom and just choose Test. So what's happening now is everything is in the timeline, and it's playing it sequentially from the first frame to the next, to the next, to the next, and it's basically creating an animation. So what we now need to do, I'm going to go ahead and close this, is I now need to tell it when you get to the very first frame to stop. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose Window and Code Snippets. And under Code Snippets, we have all of these different little things that when we click on, it's going to write code for us. We don't need to know the code. So the code I'm going to use is under Timeline Navigation, and I'm simply going to, on the very first frame, make sure that this red playhead is on the first frame because that's where I want it to stop. And I'm going to double click on Stop at this frame. And it automatically opens up a window called Actions, and it wrote the code. I don't need to do anything else to this. I can go ahead and move it out of the way or close it. Let's test the movie clip now, or let's test a project. Notice now it stops at the very first frame. Okay, we told it to stop, and now it's basically all set and ready for the user to click on one of these three buttons. Notice right now that when I mouse over the first one, it shows a hand icon, but it does not do it with the envelope or the magnifying glass. The reason for that is because in the properties of the library, we changed this one into an actual button. We did not do it yet with the other two. So I'm going to go ahead and close, and I'll also click on it, and nothing happens because we have not told it to do anything yet. So I'm going to go ahead and close this. So now we're back in Flash. What I now need to do, again, is I'm going to tell it in Flash when a user clicks on this button, and it's now a button, to go to a frame. Which frame do I want it to go to? Well, I'm going to look into my layers, and I made screen message the layer, and I made specifically frame number 10 the actual page or the screen. So that's where I'm going to tell it to go to. And you'll also notice in the timeline, as you're dragging through the different frames, it's going to tell you right here which frame you're actually on. So right now, we're on frame 6. I need to go to frame 10. That's the placeholder, the temporary location I made for my messages page. So let's go back to frame 1. I click on the button. I go back to Window, and I choose Code Snippets. And right under Timeline Navigation, the same place we went to last time, I'm going to choose Click to go to frame and stop. So what I'm telling Flash to do is when the user clicks to go to a specific frame that I'm going to tell it later which frame that is, and to stop, to not do anything else. So let's just double click on that. So it automatically writes a whole bunch of code, and notice by default the code is telling it, don't worry about all this other stuff. Let's just look at this last line. It's telling it to go to and stop at frame 5. Well, let's look at frame 5. If it goes to frame 5, it's going to nothing. What I want it to do, again, is to go to frame 10. So all I need to do is just click over, get rid of 5, type 10, that's it. Let's go ahead and save the project, File Save, or Apple S. and let's test it. Control, test movie, and test. So here we are. It stopped just the way I wanted it to on the first frame. We can now have content here, so we can have artwork, we can have graphics, whatever we want to put here. I mouse over the first button, and what do you know? It takes us to the messages page. So on the messages page, we would put any artwork, video, animation, anything we want to put here. So there's one thing I need to do, and I'll be done with this little lesson. We have no way to go back. There's no way to go back because the interface is not showing up. So let's go ahead and close this. So the final thing I would need to do would be to make these buttons the same way we did previously with this first one. And what I would also do, I'd probably make this into a button also, the logo. And with the logo, what I would do is simply say, click to go to frame 1 and stop. That would make it go back to the home page. Or I could have a separate little house icon right here that would take the user back home. But it's following the same exact steps that I did with this one right here. To make the buttons show up for my whole project, what I need to do is make sure I copy it over to the last frame. So as I drag my playhead, my project goes for the entire duration of 30 frames. The last page I have here is on frame 30. But my interface only exists on frame 1. So all I need to do is on the interface layer, click on frame 30, oops, wrong layer, and choose Insert, Timeline, and Frame. Oops, just frame, not keyframe. It's now copied over from here throughout the entire duration of my project. Let's save it. Let's test it. So now when I click on Messages, it shows me the Messages page, and I still have my interface here.